Sato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. In this talk, we are going to discuss meditation. The entire process of meditation, preliminaries, the actual state, the conclusion of meditation, what it leads to, all of this will be discussed, and using different paradigms also it will be discussed. Meditation, by definition, is a continuous flow of thought to the point of absorption on an object which is sattvic, an object which is elevated and at a higher plane of consciousness. Now, each of these words is important. Meditation is a continuous thought flow. See, you are capable of continuous thought flow. Suppose I suddenly ask you, think of the smell of jasmine. You can recollect from memory, and to a certain fractions of a second, you can hold that fragrance in your mind. You are capable of continuous thought flow. So doing this deliberately, consciously, to the point of absorption in the object of meditation. And the object, just any object cannot be used. The object must be sattvic, a holy object or a symbol of holiness. Some such object which elevates the mind. Because meditation is finally practiced at an elevated center of consciousness. Usually the heart center is recommended. We will discuss this also in the course of this video. So this is the process of meditation. In the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, very briefly, it's sutra kare, in aphorism form, Patanjali describes meditation as pratyaya ekatanata, which means a long stretched out thought. So here I would like to introduce the technical terms that Yoga Sutras use. We need to know this to understand meditation and attention. He is using the term pratyay, Patanjali. Pratyay means actually the thought. Vritti means the modification of a mind due to the thinking of a thought. I can give you a two-dimensional example which is insufficient, but at least as an example it will serve. Suppose you throw a ball at a rubber sheet. The rubber sheet warps around the ball, isn't it? As the ball touches the rubber sheet, the sheet will warp around the ball. So this warping effect is called vritti, if the sheet were mind. And the thought itself, the ball itself, is called pratyay. For every pratyay, there's a warping effect on the mind. For every thought, there's a modification in the mind, a kind of fluctuation. This is called vritti. So vritti and pratyay together create one whole thought. And if I have to generate a continuous flow of thought, as in meditation, I must work on these. I must pay attention to how my vrittis and pratyas are going. So we will further dwell on this as we go on. Let me also mention here, it is important for us to know what meditation is not. Meditation is not mere concentration. Because all these conditions are not satisfied, you may concentrate on anything, anyhow, anywhere, then it's not called meditation. Meditation is not mere concentration. It is not reflection on something. It is not contemplation. Meditation is a definite scientific process leading to a definite result. Vivekananda used to say, meditation is the highest thing. Meditation is actual spiritual life. Because it will unfold the highest divinity within you by itself. It will gain for you the object of meditation. It will help you understand the process of knowing and the process of knowing by being. Only meditation has the power to unravel this knowledge. Because finally, the perception of the infinite, the perception of the highest, is not a knowing in the dual mode, it is knowing by being. And only meditation teaches you how this happens. Isiliye, that is why we say in the Yoga Sutras commentary, it is given Yogo Yogena Jnatavyo Yogo Yogat Pravartate. You can know yoga only through yoga, and by yoga is meant here the actual act of meditation. You can know yoga only through yoga, and you can proceed in yoga only through yoga. So, this is the importance of meditation. Vivekananda, while speaking of meditation, says it is the one moment in our daily life when we are not at all material, the soul thinking of itself, free of all matter, that marvelous touch of the soul. That is meditation. He himself was an adept in meditation. When Sri Ramakrishna first saw Narendranath, this was his understanding of the man. He said he's a Dhyana Siddha. He's a man of meditation, and that is why this power and achievement. So meditation is the key to developing mind, transcending mind, and knowing the true self, knowing our true being, to unlocking the great secrets of the universe. Only the meditative mind knows the power of meditation. It is the sanest state of existence where you know everything all at once. It is the key, the secret of all knowledge. So we will try to go into meditation, understand meditation step by step. First of all, the preliminaries. I get a whole lot of questions on this. So I thought all of this should be covered in this talk. What are the preliminaries of meditation? Meditation, you don't get a new mind when you sit for meditation. The same old mind which is taking you places, which is keeping you busy all the time, the same old mind is going to work. So throughout the day, unless the mind is ordered to a certain extent, unless it is regulated, unless it is kept in a particular way, in a proper state, in a positive state, it will be difficult for you to attain the mode of meditation when you just sit. Because Monniye Kotha, mind, how do we keep it? That is important for meditation. That is why Patanjali in his Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 steps to yoga, the state of yoga, the highest state of yoga, which is Samadhi, and meditation is the 7th step there, just below Samadhi. So there, the first 2 steps, he standardizes as Yama and Niyama, which constitute basic moral disciplines, basic control, which is required for a steady mind, a regulated mind, which is required as the preliminary of meditation. Because calmness is required for the mind to be able to meditate. So what are these preliminaries of meditation? We will pay attention to it. Many people simply ignore this because they want to know about the higher states of meditation, and they want to know so many things about Samadhi. But unless we are established in these preliminaries, meditation will not reach its peak. It will yield a precious little until we are established in these preliminaries. So what are these preliminaries? Yama. Yama constitutes 5 disciplines. I will just mention them here. The first discipline is ahimsa. Ahimsa is non-violence, especially in thought. We may not be very violent in our deeds, but our thoughts can be quite violent. Anger, hatred, jealousy, all this constitutes mental violence. So being free of this, do it and see what an effort this requires. So this is the basic purification process required to generate the state of meditation. The first is ahimsa, the second is satya, which means commitment to truth in thought, word and deed. The third is asteya. Asteya is non-stealing. It means not appropriating to oneself what does not belong to oneself. The fourth is brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is celibacy, keeping the body and mind pure, committing vital energy to the heart so that it awakens. It's an essential discipline. And fifth is aparigraha, which means not taking gifts because it obligates you to the giver. So, to keep a free mind, you must be a giver, not a taker. These are the five disciplines that constitute yama. The next set is the niyama disciplines, which the first one of which is shaucha, general cleanliness of body and mind, santosha, contentment, tapas, austerity. The spirit of austerity should be there in the aspirant. And the fourth is swadhyay, self study, daily elevating study is required. And Ishwar Pranidhan, surrender to the divine. Not an egoistic attitude that I'm doing this and that, a spirit of self surrender. So these constitute the Niyama disciplines. This is insisted upon in any branch of yoga. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, you will find Yukta Hara Viharasya, Yukta Cheshtasya Karmasu, Yukta Swapnava Bodhasya, Yoga Bhavati Dukhaha. Yoga delivers one from sorrow, removes one from sorrow. If it is practiced like this, if one is regulated, steady in one's living habits, in one's lifestyle, in food, drink, sleep, to a certain extent, a regulated lifestyle will help you in attaining meditation. A very erratic lifestyle, where there is absolutely no routine, no regulation, that will take us away from this state because the mind will be restless naturally. So these are the preliminary essentials of meditation. Next we come to why the insistence on heart center. I told you meditation is a long stretched out thought at the heart center. Pratyaya ekatanata at the heart center. So why heart? By heart here is not meant the physiological heart exactly, but the mystical heart. That space in us which is located towards the right of the chest, about a finger width's length from the midline of the body. This is the point of concentration where the source of our self-awareness is found. That is why it is called the heart. It is called Hridayam in Sanskrit. Hridhi Ayam, the center of your being. Because pure consciousness is found there. In yoga, we say it is when you are performing sadhana, it is drawing the entire pranic energy to the heart is required in order to stabilize the mind. Because all spirituality begins from the heart center. That is where spiritual emotion comes in. That is where it's not just about spiritual emotion, awareness dawns. Sri Ramakrishna also speaks of it so many times, that when the mind rises to the anahata, the heart center, it sees light. This is the light of awareness. And it is surprised. It asks, what is this? What is this that I am seeing? So the heart center is very important. That is why in the preliminaries of meditation, you are asked to concentrate on the object of meditation in the heart. Whether it is performing japa, whether it is meditation on a deity, whether it is meditation on the formless, a symbol like Om, it is done in the heart. The next thing we must understand about meditation is the posture, asana. So this is very important. It is called asana siddhi in yoga, which means ability to maintain one particular posture for a long time. If possible, Padmasana is to be adopted. If not, any asana is okay if you can maintain it for a long time. The essential thing is to keep the spine erect, because the spine is the axis of your being, of your personality. Just correct your posture, keep the spine erect, and you will see you suddenly become alert. Your organs will not droop, they will come out alive. So maintaining this erect posture of the spine is essentially posture. Whichever asana you use, after a certain age, sitting long in Padmasana may become difficult. You may want to sit on a chair, but sit with the spine erect. That is all. The next thing is that this is also a common question: what is the time for meditation? So, the junction points of the day and night are considered the best time for meditation because the channels of meditation, the nerve currents of meditation naturally calm down. Nature itself is so calm during these junction points, which means basically dawn and dusk, the time when day breaks. In fact, the time before that is even better, what is called Brahma Muhurta, about 1.5 hours before the day breaks. That is the best time for meditation actually. Brahma Muhurta. That is the time when you are fully aware, hardly identified. It's a very precious time for yogis. But next to that is these junction points of day and night, which are dawn and dusk, early morning hours and dusk, when twilight hour, when the day breaks and the day merges into night. So these are very good periods. Even if you see nature, it is considerably calm at this time. If you stand next to a river, you will see the river has calmed down. There are hardly any waves at these times. So this is a really strange phenomenon that these periods, all of the Pancha Mahabhutas calm down, and we can utilize this for meditative practice. Another two periods which are good for meditation is forenoon and midnight. These are also very efficacious periods for meditation. So we must form a routine of meditation. If you sit every day at the same time, at that particular time your mind will naturally incline towards meditation. And what is the spot we choose for meditation? Where to meditate? You meditate in the heart, essentially. But where you sit, where you place your body, that place also should be calm. It should be beautiful. A good ambience is required. Positive vibrations are required. That is why Sri Ramakrishna used to suggest Mone Bone Kone, which means either forest or some corner or in the mind where you sit. That is why people prefer sitting in temples, in shrines, or in some beautiful place which stills the mind. Such places naturally usher us into the meditative state. This is regarding the place of meditation. You are actually meditating only in the mind, but where you sit also will matter in calming the mind. Then, next is breathing. Pranayam has been suggested by Patanjali in his Ashtanga Yoga. So, why is this important? Just check your present state of breathing and you will understand why it is important. The more the breathing is long drawn out and steady, the more the mind is calm. Breath is actually the link between the body and the mind. So to calm the mind, you just have to regulate your breathing. It's so simple. There are so many meditation techniques based on this. The link between prana and chit. The link between prana and mind, basically the vital energy. See, both breath and mind are expressions of your vital energy. The mind is a more refined expression. So if you regulate this vital energy either through breath or through thought, you will achieve the state of meditation. So breathing can be used as a means to calm the mind completely. Try it and you will see regulated breathing is important. Now beyond this, once we have regulated breathing, we enter the state of what is called pratyahar. This is withdrawal of the mind from objects of the senses, objects of our interest, deliberately withdrawing the mind. See, when you sit for meditation, what happens is the mind will listen to you for some time. After some time, the mind will go its own way. It starts rushing towards the objects of your interest. So then again you bring it back. Again it will rush. Again you bring it back. Then there's a considerable period of meditation. Again there is a disruption. There's a distraction. Again, you concentrate. So, the more you bring back the mind, the more you are conditioning the mind to dwell on one particular thing. It is called, there's the concept of neuroplasticity in neuroscience, which means the more your brain is plastic, the more you train it, it will create that habit. And you can do this at any point in your life. So train the mind to remain riveted at one point. When it goes out, bring it back. It goes out, bring it back. And then it will stay. This is pratyahar. Once the mind stays riveted on the object of meditation, we have entered the state of what is called dharana. This is an important state, a very important state for us to understand, because basically dharana is the state where you have fairly similar pratyais. The object of meditation remains unchanged, and hence the vritti also is fairly similar. Once in a while the pratyay changes and the vritti also changes, but fairly regulated state of vritti and pratyay is dharana. Dharana becomes a very important state just before you enter dhyan, because it is a state where you are fairly riveted to the object of your meditation. The mind is very stable and quiet, not distracted in this state. And you can grasp the nature of the object very well in this state. If the object of your meditation is a deity, you will understand his bhav, you will understand his state, you will understand the knowledge about him will be very clear to you once you attain the state of dharana. It's a magical state, a beautiful, restful state. Beyond this is the state of dhyan. Dhyan is the state where the vritti is hardly visible. It rises and falls at the same point because the pratyay remains unchanged. The object of your meditation has got fixed. The mind does not move from there. That is why the vritti, the modification due to the object, also is the same, rising and falling at the same point. So the mind becomes unmoving, as it were. The mind has become unmoving, completely riveted to the object of meditation. So pratyay ekatanata has been generated, a long stretched out thought. If you can maintain this state for a period of 144 seconds, you have attained the state of dhyan. Beyond this 144 seconds, it enters the state of samadhi. 144 seconds is a fairly long time. Think and see. It is 2 minutes 24 seconds. If the mind retains the same pratyay and hardly modifies, then that is the state of meditation. You don't know the effect of this state on the mind. One bout of real meditation, it will transform your whole life. It is bound to transform your life, because this is the power of meditation. You get complete knowledge of the object. And beyond this 144 seconds, what happens is the mind no more exists, because the vrittis completely vanish. Only the pratyay remains and shining in all glory, in full consciousness. So when there is no vritti, no movement of mind, there is no mind. You have transcended the mind. That is why it is samadhi. Samadhi has been described as arthamatra nirbhasa. You have attained to the object. The meaning, the import of the object is very clear to you. This is called knowing by being. There is no mind. Only the object, you have merged into it. You have become one with the object. That is how you know the object. This is samadhi. Samadhi is required to know the object in itself. This is the highest state of existence where mind has transcended its normal function. So it is no more there. You can't call it mind. Mind is nothing but thoughts. When there are no thoughts, no vrittis, no modifications, there is no mind. the object of meditation shines in all its glory. This is Samadhi. So in this slide, I have shown the stages to the meditative state. You can see it clearly there. An ordinary mind, just to recapture our understanding of dharana, dhyan and samadhi. See, the ordinary mind has all sorts of vrittis and pratyais, different shapes to your mind, vrittis, modifications, and in that different content. Please see that clearly. I have also written pratyay thought content and vritti mind modification. This is the ordinary state of mind. In the next diagram, you can see the state of dharana. The pratyays are fairly similar, occasionally changing, and hence the vrittis are very similar. So the mind has become very stable. In the next state, dhyan, there is only one pratyay, and the vritti is falling only around it, only at one point. So it generates pratyaya ekatanata. It generates a long stretched out thought on one particular object. Also here there is still a distinction between the knower, knowledge and known. You know you are meditating in a sense, because mind has not yet vanished. Vritti is there. So there is this tripartite distinction between knower, knowledge and known. But in the next stage, samadhi, there is absolutely no mind, because there are no vrittis. Only the object of meditation shines forth. So there is no tripartite distinction into knower, knowledge and known. So you can't even call it knowledge. We just use the general word knowledge because that is the word in English. But this type of knowing has a different meaning altogether in the actual Sanskrit, in the actual scriptures. This is knowing by being, not knowing as an object. And this can only be known through the practice of meditation. So when we say knowing Brahman, we must be clear. The Shastras, the scriptures themselves say Brahma with Brahmaiva bhavati. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. So you can actually know what is happening. You can only know Brahman by becoming Brahman. You cannot know it as an object. So this is the mental process which leads to the state of samadhi. And as I told you, samadhi is described as arthamatra nirbhasa. Only the meaning, the actual knowledge, the substance of the object of meditation shines forth. In the next slide, we will be discussing one particular paradigm on understanding this, the mental unfoldment towards meditation and beyond. So let us remember a few things here. See, many have attempted meditation without an understanding of the energy mechanism in their system. You can control thought, just like how you can use electricity without knowing all the connections of electricity in your room. The electrical engineer knows those connections, but you don't know it. But you are using electricity. So also you can control the thought mechanism without knowing too much about how vital energy is functioning in your body. But there is a function between your vital energy and thought and awareness. So if you know it, you can better handle your vital energy. That is why this paradigm is being given. All of these, whether you call it thought, emotion, whether you call it your breath, all of these are expressions of vital energy. And you can use one to control the others. But if you know the energy distribution in your system, you can control all of them at once. And this is why this paradigm is important. It is the unfolding of awareness through the awakening of Kundalini. Please know that this has its roots in some of the minor Upanishads in the Vedas. There are a class of 20 Upanishads called Yoga Upanishads, which are minor Upanishads. Shankaracharya has not commented on them. But the roots of this paradigm are there. And this has been heavily used in some forms of yoga, like Kundalini Yoga, and in the Tantras. This paradigm is not mentioned, the Kundalini and the Shat Chakras and all that is not mentioned in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, nor in the Bhagavad Gita, nor in the major Upanishads. But Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda speak of it, and they have authenticated it. So we will dwell a bit on this. In our system are what are called nadis, or channels of for carrying vital energy. They are conduits to the vital energy in our system. Now, amongst these nadis, there are three main nadis which are important to this yoga. What are these three main nadis? They are called Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. Most people have no idea of Sushumna and they are insensitive to it. Only yogis become sensitive to the Sushumna channel. But Ida and Pingala are fairly known because our entire mental activity is determined by the flow of vital energy in these two channels. So all of our thought mechanism, our emotion, our whatever you say, conflicts, emotional conflicts, intellectual obsessions, all of these are determined by the flow of prana, the free flow of prana in these two channels. If these channels are blocked, and they can be blocked, then we will have very strong inner conflicts. It will sort of impede our thought mechanism. We can have very strong emotional conflicts and intellectual obsessions, and to overcome this, the Ida and the Pingala have to be regulated. That is why these knots, this psychology describes these knots to be threefold. It is called the Brahma Granthi, Vishnu Granthi, and Shiva Granthi. So however you imagine it to be, but these knots have to be removed by clearing our mental life, by regulating our thought, positive, lawful thoughts of love, sharing, caring. This regulate our thought life. Positive emotions of caring, sharing, helping, love, service. This regulate our emotional life and our intellectual life. That means focusing the intellect on that which is elevating, on that which is liberating. This removes all the intellectual tangles, the unnecessary worries in our life. So if this is done consciously, the Ida and Pingala channels naturally get regulated. When vital energy is freely flowing in these channels, then you feel a sense of calmness in your mind. So yogis directly work on these channels and regulate them. Regulate the flow of energy in them so the mind is clear. You can also regulate the mind and thus keep these channels clear. So this is the part of mainly the Jnani and the Yogi. The Jnani is most sensitive to thought and beyond thought. The Yogi is sensitive to vital energy, the flow of vital energy in these channels. So he regulates in this way. The effect is the same and the two affect each other, as you can see. So this is regarding the nadis. The Sushumna or the central channel is not open in most people, but constantly you will find a lot of literature, and even on the net you will find a lot of things about Sushumna and the Shat Chakras and all this. The thing is, only a very advanced yogi is able to propel the entire mass of vital energy, which can be very scattered in the ordinary person, in the Ida and the Pingala. He will withdraw and propel that entire energy through the Sushumna. And along this Sushumna, the central channel, are located these different chakras, which act as doorways to higher awareness, doorways to higher knowledge. So you can see in the diagram there, the Mooladhara is the chakra at the base. Then you have Swadhisthana and Manipura. These three are the lower chakras. Let us go take Sri Ramakrishna's words on this. He says when the mind dwells in these lower planes, these correspond to some of these planes or bhumis that you find in the Vedic literature also. And he says when the mind is in these lower chakras, one is only interested in survival instincts. eating, drinking, sex, only this. But when the mind rises to the anahata, that is the place where spiritual awareness first dawns. One sees the inner light, Sri Ramakrishna says, and one says, what is this? What is this? It is such a refreshing experience. This is the light of awareness. Only at this chakra one tastes pure awareness. Below this, only body consciousness prevails. In the lower three chakras, only body consciousness will prevail. But at the anahata, higher awareness is awakened. One understands that one is more aware than identified, and one actually sees the light, in the sense, experiences what pure awareness means. In the Vishuddha chakra, one gets immersed in that awareness. And one can only speak of God, Sri Ramakrishna used to say. Beyond this, in the Ajna chakra, one actually sees the light, but still there is one, Sri Ramakrishna says, one partition, as it were, like a lantern. The light is inside, you are outside. So there's a little difference, but one is immersed in God consciousness. And when finally the mind touches the Sahasrar, one plunges into Samadhi. So the yogi does this by drawing vital energy through the Sushumna, systematically making it rise along higher channels. You can just do this by the power of thought also. If you concentrate at the heart center, you are automatically pulling vital energy there. If you concentrate on the higher chakras, automatically the pranic energy rises in you. So we are more used to this, consciously raising the mind systematically to its goal. So this is figuratively described as the union of Shakti and Shiva, because the entire mass of energy, Kundalini Shakti, is systematically taken up and made to merge in the Sahasrar, which is the place of Shiva. So this is the point where realization takes place. Now this paradigm, even a little bit of this in real experience, will change one's entire life. Vivekananda says this, that wherever you find any real greatness, you will see that the energy must have found its way through the Sushumna, at least a bit of it. In the diagram there, one graph I have given, which is the function between vital energy and awareness. The more you are able to raise vital energy upward, the more awareness you will unfold. This is the most important point to understand through this particular paradigm. Please don't attempt to do all these things without the instruction of a guru. It is just a paradigm given to you to understand how your energies and mind are correlated and how they are functioning. And it's a one way of understanding your mental life. We will next proceed to the techniques of meditation. In the slide there, I have given you 4 techniques: Vedic, Buddhist, post-Vedic and modern. There are innumerable techniques, all of which cannot be put on a slide. But this being just an introduction to meditation, you can see there under the Vedic, there is Nididhyasan, is the most important step. There are 3 steps to realizing Vedant: Shravan, Manan and Nididhyasan. Shravan is hearing, Manan is thinking, Nididhyasan is actually meditating. There is the process of Neti Neti, which is also a method, which means not this, literally. Whatever you can conceive of, the self is not this. Whatever you can sense through the senses, the self is not this. So Neti Neti is a method to actually empty mind of content, so that pure awareness, which is the source, the background of your mind, the substratum of your mind, shines forth. All these are meditation techniques which were used in the Vedas. Then you have Vidyas. These are paradigms of Brahman, pure consciousness. We have lost a lot of literature on these Vedas, but still you have Madhu Vidya, Akshar Vidya, Shandilya Vidya, all these available. Chandogya Upanishad and all these Upanishads have some of these Vidyas. They are meditation techniques to experience the state of pure awareness. Then you have a huge amount of mantra literature to usher you into the state of higher meditation, like the Gayatri mantra. A number of Vedic mantras are used. Their repetition will put you into the state of, it's a meditation technique in itself, through chanting, through repeating the mantra. Then there are inquiry based meditations like Koham, the technique of who am I. You have the Mahavakya Vichara, which means there are 4 cryptic statements in the Upanishads like Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, Ayam Atma Brahma, Prajnanam Brahma. These are the 4 statements. In a right mind, they immediately generate the experience. The import of these statements flashes across in a right mind just by the utterance from the lips of the Guru. So this is Mahavakya Vichar. There is also a way of doing Vichar, inquiry into this and arriving at their import, the truth of Brahman. So this is commonly called Mahavakya Vichar, which was very much used in the Vedic age. Then you have so many other techniques like Panchakosha Vichar, understanding the human personality in terms of the 5 koshas, Avasthatraya Vichar, analysis of the 3 states of everyday experience, Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti. Like this, in the Mandukya Upanishad dwells on this Avasthatraya Vichar. So like this, there are many techniques which were used in the Vedas, techniques of meditation which usher you into knowledge of the object of meditation. In Buddhist techniques, of course, innumerable techniques are there with such solid logical support. You have shamatha, mindfulness, metta, loving kindness meditations, vipassana, which is so common, contemplations, then reflections on pratitya samutpada, the dependent origination. Like this, there are innumerable meditation techniques. The essential thing is to take up one thing and do it. Then you have post-Vedic techniques of meditation, where also I have put Shabda Aparoksh because it is used even now in so many mutts. This is a method of discerning and entering into the import of the Mahavakyas. Aham Grahopasana techniques, it literally means grasping the eye sense in us through imagining the eye to be a point of light or a flame shining in the heart. By these forms of meditation, the real nature of the eye sense in us can be grasped. This is Aham Grahopasana technique. So many techniques are there under Aham Grahopasana. Then you have yogic meditations, which of course are so many in number, I can't mention here. You can concentrate on any object or symbol of God, on even symbols, images, iconography. You can concentrate on mantras, on anything in such a way that it ushers you into the consciousness of the object being meditated upon. Then of course Kashmir Shaivism has very well formed meditation techniques, and this is really something one can experience, like the Vijnan Bhairav. Then tantric meditations are there. This Kundalini Yoga, you will find it in the Tantras also. Then Kundalini Yoga, of course, I have put there separately because many people are interested in it. Then there is the Pratik Upasana, the Upasana or meditation on symbols like idols, natural objects. There are reflections and contemplations in Christianity. There are huge, well-developed meditation techniques in Christianity also. In all faith systems, you will find meditation techniques. Here I am just dwelling on a few. Amongst modern methods, we have Saguna Upasana, meditation on the attributes of the Supreme Lord; Nirguna Upasana, meditation on the attributeless; Vipassana, the perfect connection between breathing and mind. All this you can discover through Vipassana. Sakar Dhyan, meditation on form; Nirakar Dhyan, meditation on the formless; Leela Dhyan, meditation on the life incidents of holy personalities, realized souls, incarnations. This also is a kind of meditation. Then you have transcendental meditation, actually how to overcome mind, how to rise above the mind, how to transcend mind. So many techniques of meditation are there that we can go on and on. In the next slide, you can see meditation, the subject meditating on object. The diagram is put like that. Meditation may aim at knowing the subject it is called subjective meditation, or knowing the object, it is called objective meditation, or just stabilizing the mind, which means stabilizing the process of meditation, it's called process meditation. So meditation can be used either to know the subject, the object, or just stabilizing mind. This is something we must know about meditation. In the last slide, I have given you two living philosophies, Vedanta and Yoga, what techniques they have adopted for meditative practice. So these are techniques which we are using even today. So I thought we would just summarize it briefly. See, Vedanta uses subjective techniques like Nididhyasan, Koham, Shabda Aparoksh, Vidyas, Ahangro-Upasana techniques. Vedanta also uses objective techniques like meditation on Om, Pratik Upasana, meditation on natural objects, all of these. Finally, every meditative process will unfold the highest awareness. Even if it is meditation on an object, it is the unfoldment of awareness. In yogic meditations, the meditations are symbolic when it is Rupa Dhyan, that is thinking of the form, meditation on the form of holy beings. Guna Dhyan, meditating the attributes of divine, the divine. Leela Dhyan, thinking of the life incidents of the divine. Pratima Dhyan, meditating on images, idols. Nama Japa, repetition of the name of the Supreme. So this continuous repetition also generates the state of meditation gradually. Then there is the non-symbolic practice of meditation called Nirakar Dhyan, which is difficult but possible, where you meditate on the formless, attributeless reality of pure awareness, Brahman. So these are all the techniques of meditation which people use. As regards the value of meditation, I don't have to tell you. Today the whole world knows the value of meditation. So much of research has been conducted on meditation. Meditation stills your mind, gives you intense hours of concentration and memory, clears your mind. Meditation gives you a deep sense of balance in your life. Meditation gives you positivity. Meditation gives you intense focus and withdrawal of that focus whenever necessary. Meditation is the secret of success because it keeps your will one-pointed, not changing directions constantly. And meditation gives great inner peace and balance. Meditation is the cause for happiness. Meditation is the cause for stillness. Meditation, there's no parallel to it, basically. There can be a number of obstacles to meditation, but if you are fervent, if you are absolutely committed to it, you can overcome them. The common obstacles to meditation are laziness, distractions, addictions to sense pleasures and all this, even disease, which is actually dis-ease in the body. All these can be the obstacles of meditation. There are many more, but I don't want to dwell on them. But essentially what is required is a completely committed will, and it will lead to the highest meditative states, which is actually the unfoldment of the highest awareness and hence the highest happiness available to the human being. Because happiness itself is a function of your awareness. This you understand only in the meditative state, that the more aware you become, the more conscious you become from within, the happier you become without objects, without anything external. Just consciousness, awareness contributes to happiness. So this is the fulfillment of the meditative life. I would like to conclude this talk with just one example from our culture. This is the example of Shukadev, the great knower of Brahman, who had the knowledge of Brahman even at the young age of 16. He was actually the son of Vyas. And it seems, the story goes, that once Vyas wanted Shukadev to learn about Brahman from the sage Janak. He was a Raja Rishi. So Vyas sends Shukadev to Janak, and Janak is a well-known Rishi come king. And they hear of Shukdev's coming, Shukdev was fairly well known at that time because he was a knower of Brahman, and the entire palace prepares for his coming. But Janak gives them stern instructions. He says, when Shukdev comes to the palace, all of you will just keep silent. Don't allow him in. Let us see his reactions. So when Shukdev actually comes, the guards don't allow him in. And it seems he stayed there for 3 days with a completely tranquil mind and heart. Not bothered, but he's exuding peace and joy. His presence is exuding that. That was very clear. Then, after this period of time, he is ushered into the palace and given all sorts of comforts. A palatial room, great food to eat, everything that a princely life is offered for the next 1 week. And the same state of mind is maintained. He is extremely tranquil, calm, established in the self, exuding peace and joy. Then finally he is ushered into the court of King Janaka, and Janaka sees him for the first time and tells him, "My son, I have a test for you. Take this bowl of milk." It was full to the brim. And he says, "Go around this courtroom 7 times and let me see if a drop of milk falls or not." And in the courtroom were all sorts of distractions. There were debates going on, heated debates. There was music going on. There were beautiful dancing girls dancing about. All these distractions were there. But this young man, he carried that bowl of milk 7 times around the courtroom. Not a single drop of milk fell, because his hand was so steady. His hand was so steady because his mind was so steady. The mind rooted in the consciousness of the self. The mind rooted in Brahman. So steady and calm that even his eyes were so steady. Hand was so steady that not a drop of milk fell. When he came back, the same tranquil face, Janaka tells him, "My son, I have nothing more to teach you. You have attained the highest. I bow down to you." So this is the glory of the meditative state in our culture. The man of the highest wisdom is naturally a man of meditation. His mind functions at that level. With this, I would like to conclude this talk. Let us pray that the meditative state becomes a reality for all of us. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace.